April 22nd, 1956, East Berlin. The rain had been falling for days. Across the divided city, telephone lines were failing. Soviet and East German personnel were trying to locate a buried cable. At first there was nothing unusual about the job, but when they reached it, they discovered something that should not have been there. The telephone cable had been deliberately tapped, and the wiretap didn't simply disappear into the surrounding earth. It led into a tunnel that had been secretly constructed beneath Berlin by American and British intelligence. The operation had taken approximately a year to build, more than 3,100 tons of soil. After the Second World War, Berlin became almost impossible to explain. For intelligence officers, that made the city extraordinarily valuable. The problem was getting close enough. If you wanted to know what an adversary was saying, the question became increasingly simple. Could they be reached from underneath it? The cover story was deliberately ordinary. But beneath that ordinary-looking compound, something extraordinary was about to happen. They had to build a tunnel without anyone realizing they were building a tunnel. Soil, lots of it. The engineers designed a steel-lined passage, section by section. The tunnel wasn't designed for soldiers to storm through. It wasn't a bunker. It wasn't a weapons facility. It was quieter, a listening station. British technicians installed the taps, and on May 11th, 1955, the listening operation began. The mission was built around patience. One conversation could reveal a name, another could reveal a location, and the scale of the collection became enormous. The Americans had built an underground ear, and it was hearing a remarkable amount, but there was one thing that the ear couldn't hear. George Blake was not an outsider who had somehow wandered into British intelligence. He was an MI6 officer. While in captivity, he was recruited by the Soviet intelligence service. When he eventually returned to British intelligence, he was secretly working for Moscow. During the planning of the Berlin Tunnel, he learned about the project. He passed the information to his Soviet contacts. The KGB therefore knew about the operation while it was still being planned, but the Soviets allowed it to remain in place. April 1956. The tunnel had been operating for almost a year. One of the underground cables was already in poor physical condition. Water entered the cable. The line became unusable. They began digging, and on the night of April 21st to 22nd, they reached the tap chamber. The operation was exposed, but what happened next would become one of the most fascinating parts of the entire story. The tunnel was open to journalists. Photographs were taken. The Soviet side publicized the operation as evidence of Western espionage. The Americans should have been embarrassed, but something went wrong. But there was another problem for the Soviets. The Americans had already evacuated the tunnel. If the KGB had known about the tunnel from the beginning, there was an obvious possibility. But once the tunnel was discovered, a much bigger question emerged. If the Soviets had known about the operation before it was even completed, why had they allowed the Americans to keep listening for almost a year? The recordings themselves were real. The tunnel had intercepted genuine Soviet communications, and the material collected was extensive. The material included military communications, telephone conversations, and information about Soviet forces and their activities in East Germany. The extraordinary part was that the KGB already knew what the Americans were doing. The reason was George Blake, a British intelligence officer who had secretly been working for the Soviet Union. Blake passed information about the tunnel to his Soviet contacts before the operation was even completed. That meant the Soviet intelligence service knew exactly what the Western operation was designed to do, and yet they did nothing to stop it. Why? Historians have debated the answer ever since. One possibility was simple. The Soviets may have decided that destroying the tunnel would reveal that they knew about the operation. Another possibility was even more unsettling. Perhaps Moscow believed the tunnel could be turned into an intelligence advantage of its own. There is no simple answer. The tunnel produced valuable intelligence, but the fact that the Soviets knew about it means that every piece of information gathered must be understood in the context of that deception. By the time the tunnel was exposed in 1956, the operation itself was over. The listening equipment fell silent, the cables were disconnected, and the tunnel became a physical reminder of one of the Cold War's strangest intelligence operations. Above it, Berlin continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened. For almost a year, the Americans had listened from beneath the city. They believed they had built a secret ear into the Soviet communications network, but the man who betrayed the operation had already made sure the secret was never entirely theirs. The tunnel's gone, the recordings are old, but the question it left behind is still alive. When two intelligence services believe they are secretly listening to each other, how do you know who is actually being watched? If you want to uncover more of the hidden operations, secret experiments, and forgotten stories that shaped our world, subscribe to Shadow Archive.